And to go back to our last discussion, and I appreciate we've had a little, or some have had some discussion over the lunch break. There were 3, I think, due to speak. I just want to check, do those speakers now wish to have their opportunity to speak, or shall we go to what has been put up on the board? And Craig looks like he would like to speak, so we'll do that.
All I was going to point out was we've had a government for the last 6 years gone that didn't talk to anybody about anything, and you just got every week there was some great announcement in the paper and everybody said nobody talked to us about it, and it was always a failure. So if you go out doing research and then announce to the stakeholders it affects, this is what we found, it's going to be a failure. It's just guaranteed it'll be a failure. We've had 6 years of proof, and so you've got to be involved from the start to stop all that wasted time and energy. It's logical.
Yeah, look, some valid comments. Well, some of the one of the comments that I think came from councillors was there's been a huge amount of reviews on peat. There's a lot of literature. Is it need any more research? Can we not collate what's already out there and whatever? But the point made, and I think Robbie was pretty hot on it, was you've got to involve the people who it affects. Can I add
into that? I think maybe one thing you should put in there is you should either put in that you want best farming practices promoted, and you want, because that's, when we dug into that, that's where it was meant to go. It's getting legs to going into policy and that now. But when they first talked about peat and what was the research about, it was actually to find the best land uses for it, and where could values be added to it. And now it's getting into that point where it's getting into policy of should you be farming it or not. And you need to bring it back to, I'd like you to think that we need to say, you need to be clear about, and it's not mostly the right committee, but we want our peat farms or peat land to be that whatever we do, we're adding value to it, not decreasing it or making it not necessarily a wetland, but we're going to use it for the most economic use and economic benefit to the community, and that's to be decided. Yeah, both short and long term, yeah, definitely. But I think when the policy started to get involved, and then, as Noel said, then they started saying, well, in future, this could be used to making policy direction.
Yeah, and that's what, I'm always probably looking ahead of what this really means. And so for me, it was great looking at what was sold to us during the LTP as being, let's be able to come up with best practices for managing peat. That's great. And then some further discussion and alarm bells started going off and said, is this going to lead to policy about how this land is used in the future? And if that's the case, I'm a little concerned about, facilitating that. So, yeah. All right. I know there's a resolution. Are you there to move the resolution?
No, not quite, because I think, to your point, Robbie, it shouldn't be just about peat. And I think the draft, what we put up there in terms of the mission statement for ICM is actually around, if you look at under 6.4, work program for flood protection, river management and Waikato land drainage, it also is true for all of the assets that ICM look after, including the coastal and other things as well. So, I think if the mission statement was followed, if there was a mission statement and it was followed, I think a lot of these other side conversations and these diversions, if you like, probably wouldn't even happen because it wouldn't be necessary in the first place. So whether we want to put a further point 4 that this table recommends that Council consider redefining the mission statement for ICM.
Yeah. The committee recommends that the mission statement for ICM be, or that a mission statement for ICM be implemented.
Well, we're not sure that there isn't one, are we? Sorry if I'm interjecting.
Be clarified, or if not, Or
Be
if-
drafted.
Yeah.
It'd be drafted.
To be clarified, recommends that it be, and if not, one in place, that it be created or drafted.
Drafted, and maybe our draft could be, put there as a, straw man, if you like.
Sorry.
I think I can possibly help you here.
Okay, we'll go to the man.
What you could do is make a resolution here that the committee requests that a report be tabled at the next meeting pertaining to the development of the mission strategy.
Mission strategy statement for
Thank
ICM.
you,
That's
Dave.
right.
We knew you'd have a way of crafting it.
Okay, well, are you happy with Dave's suggestion? He's, hang on, too many at once. So are we happy that Dave, oh. We gave leave of absence to the rest of the team because they were going to go and celebrate your absence. Right. Thank you, Sarah. Mr. Simpson. I can't understand why you're so cynical, sir. No, it'll be there before. We were told yesterday we've got a year to earn our keep before we have to go back to the masses and ask for another term. So we'll be here. Okay, so the committee requests that a report be tabled at the next meeting detailing the current ICM mission statement and or its subsequent development.
So if one doesn't exist,
Yeah.
then there'll be a report about.
Yep. And that will obviously open the door next month to have that discussion.
Do we need to table the one that we've got?
Mate, I've noted that in a minute.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So do we?
Yes, sorry, just on point number 3, just going back to that one. Are we wanting to just hear council clarify their position, or do we wish to encourage them to favour adaptation over retreat?
I think in particular adaptation over retreat, that suggested adaptation is the preference, isn't it?
Does it? It's just asking them to clarify what their position is. It doesn't actually say we recommend that they prefer that they focus on adaptation as the first instance. What's the best way, rather than looking to retreat in the first instance?
Good point.
Because they'll just tell you what they want to do.
It's so cynical, guys.
I need to take retreat totally out of it.
No, it is.
No, to just
clarify.
I think,
well, in particular, the preferred option or the
preferred option is to adapt where possible.
yeah, well, what we're asking is council to clarify that.
As the preferred option. Is the preferred option.
Perfect.
Yep. Right, I'd like someone to call for someone to move that, please. Thank you, Chris. Seconder? Mike? Oh, jointly seconded by Mike and Craig, if they're splitting hairs. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. So you want?
Where we wanted to have it, always.
No, the motion's passed, so no further discussion.
Last time
Move on.
school like that was at school.
No, Will, are you okay?
Yeah.
You've still got the, so yeah, when you finish speaking, can you just, so I know you,
Oh,
yeah, just so we know we're finished. Okay, well, that took a little bit of time, but that's great. Thank you. Right. Can somebody tell me where we're up to?
0.5, page
Oh, he's
143.
put it in front of me.
There you go.
643. No,
143.
143. Oh, funny enough, I've got it. Right, so that brings us to Lisa and Sarah.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, yeah, the author, Lisa, is not available for the report on the reliability update on the condition assessment of our assets. This is a standard report that we receive every year. And yes, I'm going to take the report as read and happy to take any questions, observations from the committee members at this time. Just by way of background, there is, if you read the introduction to the report, we do have a reliability engineer, Steve Hall, who goes around assessing, I guess, the condition of all our assets annually, and he provides reports back to the team to inform the future work program around our maintenance and making sure that the condition of our assets are kept in good check. So we do have a good program in place, good process in place. We are trying to ensure that we impart some of the knowledge from, and I've spoken to Trevor about this previously, just to passing on the knowledge that Steve brings to the table around this area, and making sure that our younger team, or our new members are are learning as we go too, so we can work across the board a little bit better. But so we'll take the report as read, Mr. Chairman. Happy to take any questions, but there's nothing substantially I wish to highlight in the report at this stage. Thank you.
Can I go to Trevor? Yeah, caught you out. Trevor, you have been vocal, and I mean that in the nicest possible way, about the checks and the maintenance and the likes. Is the report giving you any confidence that what we're doing is improving? Just for me reading it, and without being cynical or otherwise, one would have to say it seems to be going in a positive direction. So it talks about, yeah. All right, so Chris.
We're talking about page 147.
43 through to 47, yeah.
You're just quickly reading it and basically looking at the pie graphs. The embankment's 100%, there's no issues there at all because it's all green, when going. But when you actually drill in and you look at the next page and you compare the pump station and the floodgates, we're only one step away from failure. Well, not failure, but everything's fair, and it's over 50%, and there's very little that's actually green, and there's more in the red than there is the green, which is, to me, is actually concerning. That I don't know what it's been like in the past, but to go from fair to poor, we're only one step away. So to me, I wouldn't be congratulating ourselves. I'd actually be saying, well, what's going on?
Okay, so is that Adam, or do you want to throw Sarah under the bus one last time?
I don't know where it's come from, but just looking at that graph now, yeah.
So it's part of our asset condition. I guess we have a rating system. So 1 is Rolls-Royce, 5 needs, it's in critical, I guess, disrepair, needs urgent work. So it is naturally to expect with the aging assets that we have, that we'll have some assets that might slip from a 1 to 3 to 4 and 5. We obviously want to try and avoid that. We have inherited a lot of assets over time as well. And so we do have an asset management improvement program in place where we try and prioritise our assets subject to obviously resource, time, budget, to ensure that we don't have those 5, because that's a critical failure potential. And it also depends on the risk of what that asset is providing on the scale. Is it a big pump station or is it a relatively small one? And the same for like stop banks and floodgates. So we do expect some slippage in the program. It's the scale of that slippage, obviously, that we would be concerned about. So where that asset is proven, being assessed at being in a 4 or 5, we will try and prioritise that to get it back up to a 3 or better.
I'm just wondering if it should be labelled better, more appropriately, because fair, poor, it doesn't mean anything. Like there's an acceptable range, and so if it's acceptable, hey, that's fine. But if it's degrading and it's changing, that's what we need to know. And I don't know how that can capture it, because that's very, very.
What page are you on, Chris?
He's run 46.
47, just looking at those
47.
graphs there.
46. Oh, that one there. Okay, yep. Okay. Well, I can take that back to Lisa, who's
Yeah,
our
yeah,
asset
'cause
management
We-
team
because
lead.
It's not making it look good.
Yeah, but the other issue, I'm going to take issue with you, Adam, is that
Mhm.
the transition from Waikato and Franklin took place 12, 13 years ago. To say that we're still addressing issues from that time is a bit of a stretch in my view, if we haven't addressed those. So maybe that has to go back to Lisa to say, you know, what is the situation? Is there any historic issues that we haven't addressed? And if so, why not? That would concern me that, you know, it was 2012 we did the transition.
Yeah, I don't know, Sarah, I don't know if you've got any observations or comment to make on where you, from your perspective, or without putting you on the spot. Yeah.
You know, there's certainly, you know, quite a few, you know, when you think of the Lower Waikato asset base, I think there's some 260 floodgates, a few hundred kilometres of stop bank and 60 odd pump stations. And so it does take, even though we've had that, you know, some of that infrastructure for, you know, a decade or more, it does take time to obviously work through upgrading those assets. And we've obviously got a lot of assets which were put in at similar times, which obviously are, you know, aged in the same, I guess, condition. But, you know, there aren't any assets that I'm aware of in that number that I would, you know, which is presented here, that I would think would be a challenge for the level of service. I think there's certainly some areas which do need upgrading, and that's what we're picking up through our capital renewals program. But, you know, without seeing the detail that's sitting behind that, you know, like I'm, yeah, certainly not seeing that we've got a large amount of pump stations which aren't, for example, floodgates fit for purpose and about to fail. You know, we have made changes as well within our capital budgets. I've put in a reactive, I guess, budget so that when the guys identify issues, they can go through a much easier process of actually just getting it fixed without all the red tape of doing that. So I think with what we have in place, you know, there are some known issues, obviously, at some pump stations, which, you know, are identified as part of that capital renewals program. But yeah, so I don't know if that's of help, but that's
Just so long as
what I
you
would.
fix Trevor's.
Trevor, you've been getting a few things fixed, haven't you? New floodgate. Yep. I think you've got a motor coming up as well, so a motor replacement as well. So
No,
yeah.
that's great. Thank you, Sarah. Chris, was your light on?
Yeah, no, it's something, I think it's a moving feast. We need to be looking at, moving things. We need to
Yeah,
make sure.
I think staff have understood this and in recent time have tried to address it in a better way than they had historically. And I know Trevor's raised some very valid points about when people are there and if they see something, you know, just because it's not in your portfolio, you don't do something about it. You've got to tell somebody. So I think there's been internal movements around that. So who's who? So we've got Robbie and then Craig and then Will.
Just to add to that, I just think maybe there needs to be a better assets, because that's not saying the asset's buggered, but it's saying there's a degradation around it, that it's not looking the best, and that needs to be scaled to what that is. And I know, like the other day, Greg come to us and said a whole lot of assets needed new safety guards put around them. But is this more important to make sure that asset is up to standard than putting a safety guard somewhere else? I think that's something that must be assessed as well, that if this asset is in need of immediate remediation, is that more important than a safety guard somewhere or something? I think that must be assessed in it as well, so.
Yeah, and that's an assessment for the staff to make.
Yeah.
Because of the different legislation that applies. So if you can mitigate, isolate, or whatever the other one is.
If we're getting spent somewhere instead of that, it should be a reason for why it's been done. That's all I'm saying.
So I'm going to go, so Craig, was it? Yes, and then Will.
You've got in the section about the passive acoustic tool you've used, and it says it's detected 6 blade strikes of fish at Orchard Road and Steiner's pump stations.
So
and
what page is that?
Oh, is it next section? Anyway, 151.
No,
Sorry.
That's, we'll wait for that.
Okay.
It's going to be addressed in the next session. So Will.
Yeah, just obviously what Chris said is very accurate. You look at the floodgates on page 146 and 147 and the pump station conditions, half of them are poor or very poor. But then in 2018, they said they were going to go to a condition-based maintenance program from a fixed time maintenance program. That would suggest that they were in pretty good, and they then said that they made a $500,000 saving but then given that the assets, half of them are poor or very poor, that would suggest that they're kicking the can down the road of maintenance. They're not doing what actually needs doing, because you would think you would only do it on a condition basis if you actually had quite good assets to start with. But it looks like with half of them are poor.
And my understanding was that the opposite was supposed to happen. So Sarah, can we come back to you?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So I think, the condition-based maintenance was basically moving away from, we used to have a standard of every 8 years we would lift and overhaul a pump, but it didn't recognise that some of those pumps would actually barely operate. Some of them worked really hard. And so the condition-based monitoring means that it might be that some pumps actually get done every 4 years if it's needed, and some might not be done for 20 years. So it was to move away from just doing it based on something which wasn't actually reflective of the use and the condition. And so
Sarah, that's quite appropriate for the pumps, but what about the floodgates and the likes?
the floodgates typically it was really the pump stations which had that fixed period where something was done on it, more so I think than the floodgates. But I'm wondering, and just on your other question there, Will, and again, I haven't seen the information that sits behind this that Lisa has used in pulling this together, but I wonder if there's components at that pump station where there's a concern, then that has a grade score rather than the pump station as a whole being a 4 or a 5. But again, I haven't seen the information.
So can we
that
take an
sits
action?
behind
Yes,
it.
I think it makes sense, because you're talking condition based on the actual pumps, and these are talking pump stations and floodgates, I guess, slightly different things.
So can we have an action point that you'll have a talk with Lisa and sort of get some better clarity around this, please? All right, so that's that. We've come to the end of the report, I believe. Adam, we've finished on that report. So somebody move that report be received. Thank you, Robbie and Chris. Thank you. All right, moving on now to the what is it? Pathways to the Sea. So, ladies, I think most of you have seen the picture of the trial at Huntly, where the 1.2 metre eel went through it unscathed. Great outcome. So, welcome, ladies.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Michelle White. I'm not sure if I've met many of you before. So I work in the Integrated Catchment Management Directorate and the Environmental Compliance team. So I'm just here to present on the Pathways to the Sea report. I have a few slides, if we could get those up, just to highlight some of the work that was undertaken as part of the project. Yep, here we go. So the goal of the project is to improve the safe downstream passage of fish at our pump stations. So the objectives of the project were to undertake research and development and test new tools, and to develop a strategy So the draft strategy is in the agenda pack. So that's just a draft. And it's going through our process at the moment, engagement process. So on to the next slide, please. So this just is a slide showing some of the pumps that we have tested through Pathways to the Sea. So in the top left corner, we've got the modified McEwen's pump, which we've tested, the Bedford pump in the middle, and the in-case Archimedes screw pump. And the below photos just show the traditional pumps that aren't fish friendly. So the top three are fish friendly, and those are the pumps that were trialled as part of Pathways to the Sea. So the modified McEwen's pump was installed at Huntley Golf Course Pump Station. So that's a brand new technology, first of its kind in New Zealand. And it went through a very long process to be designed and manufactured. And that was in partnership with WRC and McEwen's and Callaghan Innovation. The one in the middle, that's the Bedford fish-friendly pump. So that we've got one installed at Orchard Road and one at Paeroa. So the one at Orchard Road was tested for fish friendliness. The results weren't as great with this Bedford fish-friendly pump. It showed better mortality, but there was still significant injury and damage to the eels that passed through this pump. And then in case the Archimedes screw pump, that one has been installed at Mangawhero, and we've got two at Churchill East. So that has shown really, really good results with 100% survival of the eels that have passed through that pump. And just on the modified McEwen's, that's showed really good results as well. 97% fish friendliness. So we had out of 108 eels that passed through, 2 suffered some damage and 1 died overnight. But the one that died overnight, it's unknown why that one died. It was likely because of unknown causes or poor condition. So we're not saying that was inflicted by the pump. Next slide, please. So this just shows the monitoring work that we've undertaken to monitor the fish friendliness of these pumps. So we install a net at the outlet of the pump. So any fish and eels that pass through the pump are captured in this net. And then we go and check the net and we take all the fish out of the net and then we assess for any injury or mortality. So we check every single eel. We give them a small dose, so we put them to sleep. So then we can thoroughly check them for any injuries, any scuffs or marks. And we take photos and we record all the details. Some of them we've taken some x-rays of as well. We've taken a small sample just to see if there's any injuries that we can't see through a visual inspection. And we can see in the top right-hand corner, we take measurements. So we take measurements of their eyes, the head widths, their fins as well. So we take thorough measurements. And in some cases, we've done some tagging as well. So at Mangawhero Pump Station, we tagged some eels. So we could see how many passed through the pump and when they did this. And we could also, at Steiner's Pump Station, we could detect their behaviour as well. So we could see them going down through the pump or out through that gravity bypass outlet and coming back and forward as well. So looking at their behaviour. So a lot of work is involved with this monitoring and we've had some really, really good results. And we've been working with some local iwi groups as well. So they've been involved. There, another slide. Oh yes, trap and transfer as well. So those other slides were focusing on the pumps and the work we've done around the pumps. So trap and transfer has been a really successful tool that we've trialled as part of the project. So we can't replace all pump stations immediately with fish-friendly pumps. So we've come up with some tools that we can do in the interim. And one of them that has been really successful is trap and transfer. So trap and transfer is just trapping the eels upstream of the pump station and then releasing them downstream. And in this case, we release them directly into the Waikato River. So we did trap and transfer earlier this year at KARAKIA Pump Station and Bell Road. And across both of those pump stations, we netted about 350 eels. And those were all nice big migrant eels. So those ones were all captured safely and then transferred downstream into the Waikato River. So this is a really good tool that we can implement and get iwi involved as well in the interim to reduce mortality at our pump stations.
Just go back a bit with a question. You've got the mortality rates of old pumps and new pumps.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but where does the present open Archimedes sit? There's many of them around. So have you done any testing on, with lots of the background to that, lots of discussion going on at the moment about, the new style pump and the safety grille in the front, right? And so the information that we're learning by the minute is the new style enclosed pump may need protection from trash or logs or whatever. The open style pump that have been around for many, many years don't need the protection of the grill thing in the front, right? But obviously you had a picture of an existing one up there. Maybe that could come back up a couple of slides back. So the question is, I wonder what the mortality rate is on the existing open one, because it will be higher than the enclosed one because you've got an edge. But have you done any work to find out?
Yeah.
Because everything comes down to a trade-off.
Yeah.
And so, yes,
Yeah.
there's the existing one there on the bottom right.
Yeah, so yeah, we haven't done any research on the traditional pumps.
Yeah.
So we're just basing it on overseas research
Yeah.
at the moment. Yeah, but we know traditional is better than or the traditional screw is better than a axial pump.
Yeah, I would.
But it's not as good as the in-case Archimedes screw pump.
I know, but the issue is that there are other issues for the landowners. Like at the moment, you might be aware, but a big open one like that is it just takes everything. Cows, even not the big ones, go up there. Okay, shouldn't say that, but they do. And so the landowners don't have to deal with the weed problem, which is a huge problem in front of pumps. And so a question that come up with the new style at Churchill East, which are working very well and they're great, but they have a grill in front of them. And so, some of the landowners are saying we spent $7 million or $6 million because we thought we were getting rid of our weed problem. And so that's still working through. But, and so what I'm getting at is maybe by spending a lot of money on a closed Archimedes to save a few fish, where we might lose, I'll pick a figure, you might lose 5% by going through an open one, but there's far greater benefits to an open one, a new open one, a closed one. So I just seem to be a bit of a gap in the research. That's what
So I've got to speak in order to come of Brendan and Craig. So can we turn your mics off, guys, and give, that's it. And could you keep yours open, Michelle?
I was just going to respond because I've been quite involved in it as well, and I think can speak to some of what Trevor's raised, and Brendan, you'll remember as well, given, we had this discussion with the Motor Karaka pump station and with the landowners there, the question, they were looking at a land industry screw pump, which is actually the current manufacturer of the existing screw pump there at Motor Karaka. And so I asked actually Alicia, who was the ecologist who's worked closely with Michelle at the time about the research, because that was one of the questions that Brendan and the other landowners had asked about those traditional screws. And she said that we haven't done the research in New Zealand because there's already so much research out there worldwide which show that whilst, as Michelle says, they're better than like an axle pump, that they are well known to inflict damage. And so that's why we have looked then at the other technology being these fish flow innovations enclosed, and looked at the McEwens as well. And I think the matter with the screen, and I know this is a really hot topic and lots of discussion on that, I don't think that, from a safety perspective, that like the screen, obviously the screen serves a few different purposes. One, to protect the pump, but two, there's also the safety piece as well. And not to say that there's a mandated position on having a screen ahead of a screw, but it's not to say if we have a traditional screw pump, which is maybe not so vulnerable as, one of the fiberglass ones, that from a safety perspective that we don't have to consider the screen. They're all on a case by case basis. So I'm not saying that there's a blanket or we need a screen in place, but just because we've got one of the older type doesn't mean that we don't have to have a screen. And there's other aspects aside from just the fish friendliness in terms of the efficiency and the maintenance and that between the different pumps. So yeah, we have, and I think there was a presentation a while back on that, that we presented back to Brendan and others on that and those different types of pumps. But yeah, that's basically why we haven't trialled it with Motor Karaka, because there's all, from a cost perspective, there's information already out there worldwide on those types of pumps. And we did have a look at some of the newer stuff which had come through from land industry as well in terms of the fish friendliness. And, ultimately we want to ensure that when we're making an investment in a pump, that you don't want to be redoing that again in 10 years because it doesn't meet the standard. That we know that fish flow innovations pump is 100% fish friendly, and it will pass some really big fish through it as well. And like with the screen as well, we've been on a journey with that. Trevor, you've been and you've had a look at it, and it's just different than, it's a trash screen, and it's different than what we, how we've seen performance with, at other pump stations, those, thinking of Churchill East, that still, pulls the, unless anything's changed, Mike, like that is pulling the water through despite weeds sitting against it, because while it looks like there's a heap of weeds sitting against that screen, I think there's a 4-metre water column and the water is going through, and, we've got all the feedback on that system telemetered and can see that those pumps are running full noise.
Okay, so right, we've got an order of Brendan, Craig and Matthew, and I really want to start trying to wind up the day, because otherwise, I don't want to be here at 5. I don't think you all do either. So, because I know Sarah's got a function to go to, but I think she's baked a cake. No, we're waiting for you. Right, so on that basis, short and sweet, please. Brendan, Craig and Matthew.
Yeah, I think Sarah's covered that quite well. In terms of Motor Karaka, our committee, we did a lot of work with Sarah's team. We've actually probably moved our position away from the open Archimedes to the enclosed Archimedes, probably as a preference. It's probably a bit of compromise on our behalf, but some of the actual efficiency numbers on the enclosed screw and the efficiency curve for pumping water, that is, just pumping water alone is actually quite compelling. That's what it appears like. The other one is too, the guy from Fish Friendly Innovations, Gerhard, yeah, like he assures us that we actually don't need screens for his pumps. So, and so I'm not saying you're wrong, Sarah. And we just think that at Motor Karaka, if we need to think carefully about what we do when it comes to installing screens or not, and if it's mainly around people safety, then there's probably other ways to mitigate against that. So what we'd like to do is work proactively with council, your team, we all form a team on what that looks like. So yeah, but to Michelle's point, I think if this is the way forward and if pumps are being replaced, then it's probably logical we do it. I actually think that the cost of the pump isn't the primary cost when you're looking at a pump replacement. It's actually the whole cost is the big number that you got to be worried about, and how we can trim back the big number rather than the number for just the pump.
Thank you.
And I do come back to Michelle insofar as what this whole project was about, the pathways to the sea. And I know this is the downstream movement. I have asked, not directly to Michelle, about how the fish get back up and into the streams and the likes. It seems somehow that we've been mincing them up as they've gone out over many years and years, and they still seem to be in there. So they're obviously getting back somehow, or else there was a hell of a lot in there to start with that haven't migrated. So, but we still need to address that issue in the future. So, okay, coming to Craig and then Matthew, and then that's going to be it.
On the passive acoustic tool, I was just wondering, basically, how do you know they're fish strikes and not some other foreign object in there? That's basically what I was wondering.
Yeah, that is a good question. I know because they did test the background pump noise, so they were able to distinguish it from the pump noise. I think I wasn't involved with that trial. Were you involved with that trial? No. Yeah, I can get if I can take that question and get back to you on that one.
Yeah, I see it's basically saying that this is like the test and the test has worked and it's going to be rolled out, or sort of how it reads. And so if that's the case, that seems pretty vague.
Yeah, we've recommended not to proceed with that tool just because it is very dependent on the site. So you need to do all the modelling for each particular site based on the pump background noise. So it's not something that you can just roll out, over blanket over each pump station. So you need to set it up for each pump station. So that's one that we haven't recommended going forward.
Matthew.
I've given this matter quite a bit of thought. I'm talking about the issue of the open 80 screw versus the enclosed, and we've been advised that the enclosed one definitely needs screens, because it would be a real disaster if something got jammed up in some point in time. And
Just bring the mic closer to you, Matthew.
Oh, sorry. So that's that's to me a pretty big consideration. In thinking through this thing, for example, in the Mangatawhiri, we've got several compartments that are in dire need of duty pumps. In other words, duty pumps that pump constantly relatively low volumes of water, and some of those compartments would require a small sized enclosed. In my view, what would be ideal for them would be a small sized enclosed Archimedes screw pump that is fish friendly, allows a lot of fish flow, and it's pumping the maximum amount of time. And then at some future date, when our axial pumps need replacement, beside that beside the duty pump, which would be enclosed, you would then put an open Archimedes screw pump, which then takes the bulk of the flood water, and it doesn't sort of pump all year round, or it doesn't even pump the bulk of the water that's pumped in the drainage district. It just takes the massive flood water.
I think we're deviating from the subject a bit, Matthew.
Well, I think it's quite important.
Well, it's not relevant to the subject right now. I want to keep it to the fish-friendly issue. That's about going forward. Fish-friendly pumps, that's a valid point. What we need to do in the future in a certain compartment or a scheme is a separate issue altogether.
This has got a general application. It's not. I sort of feel a bit annoyed that you shut me down.
I'm not trying to shut you down. What I'm trying to do is keep it relevant. And this is about the fish friendliness, and you're talking about future development within a certain scheme. And if you can keep it relevant to the fish friendly pumps.
Well, I think that the right balance is a combination of the two. an enclosed for duty pump duty and and an open for taking peaks of floodwater. And I think that is an alternative to, having enclosed Archimedes screw pumps with screens in that has to take all the water. I'll just leave it at
And
that.
look, I accept your points about it. The reality is that whatever pump is replaced or new pumps put in, it'll be site specific and it'll be addressed at each specific site. So rather than generalization, I am really wanting to bring this meeting to an end. Craig and Brendan, is it relevant to this issue?
Yeah, I was just wondering at peak flood flow, what the passage of fish life is, aquatic life, because that would carry over to Matthews if his pumped for 75% of the water and you found that the next 25% you never see an eel anyway because they're all high and low. Well, why not just have the cheapest, quickest, biggest bulk pump there is? And if eels are still migrating at peak flood, then yes, you need the full Monty. What's your
Is there any studies on that?
So, what was your question? Was it?
Well, carrying on from him, what he's trying to say is, can we save a shitload of money by having a fish-friendly pump that does, say, 75% of the work? And then you have the cheapest pump to do the last 25, a full flood that it might run for, I don't know, your area, you say the days, 20 days a year or something like that. Is any work being done on aquatic life going through the pumps at full flood to know that can that be done? Is that an achievable thing? Or is that not even worth worrying about what Matthew's trying to say? Because you've still got eels and fish migrating and going through the pump at full flood flow.
Yeah, well, so the eels do migrate at a certain period of time, and that is during that peak flood time. So they're moving during rainfall events and flood times, anytime from January to May. So that's, yeah, so they would be.
At what part of the water? Is it at the top of the water or at the bottom, or is it anywhere in between?
Anywhere, yeah, anywhere in between.
Okay, thank you for that, helping clarify that, Craig. That's very helpful.
So,
Brendan.
so my point probably goes back to Trevor's original point and touches on to what Matthew's trying to get us to think about. I think the important thing here is we don't actually quite understand, without looking to overseas studies, what the fish friendliness of traditional open Archimedes are. Perhaps, just a thought, maybe, I know we looked at Motor Karaka, we said, well, when we were still considering the open pumps, we said, could we do a fish-friendly trial on Motor Karaka? It was sort of thought to be a little bit impractical and a little bit expensive to do. Well, we didn't know what it would cost, but we weren't sure how practical it was, but we were willing to do it. But perhaps maybe on Matthew, on the Mangatara Free Compartment 3, Archimedes screw, maybe a trial could be done there, working with Matthew on that to ascertain that, because that for future direction, it might actually help us come up with some of those numbers, some of that information that we've got a bit of an information gap, if I'm not wrong, and I think to be fully informed, I think it would be really helpful, because I think that would quickly ascertain if it's more than 1 or 2%. I would say that you may not want to do it, but somebody else will have an opinion on what that percentage should be. But perhaps we should just get that information if it was only going to cost, in the order of $5,000 to $10,000 or something like that. I don't know what it would cost, Sarah, but you would have an idea.
Yeah.
But that may be a simpler pump station to actually do a test on.
Yeah, the costs are pretty eye-watering, really, when you look at what's involved to actually test the success of transfer through the pumps. It's certainly not something which would be in the order of $5,000 or $10,000. Like it is really, really involved. And I think coming back to my earlier point, screws that we have here in New Zealand, like the Manga Tau Free 3, Compartment 3 in Motu Karaka, there are a lot of those in other places, and they've done that research. And from that research, and they've got much smaller eels, it's showing mortality and damage. And so we know for ourselves in New Zealand with much bigger eels, that that's going to be even worse. So that's why we haven't invested in going down that path, because we've already got information on a worldwide scale which shows that they're not the best option.
I've asked Adam to take an action point on this and come back to us with a little bit more clarity around the issue, what Matthew's raised and supported by Brendan. So we'll have something at our next meeting. Thanks, Adam. Yeah, so we'll take it offline and come back. All right. There have been no further questions? No. There are no further questions. No, I think I said there are no further questions. And as such, can I have someone move the receipt of the report? And that will be Brendan and Craig. So moved. Against? Carried. Michelle, thanks very much and for supporting her, Sarah. It was interesting when we went out to Huntly for the official opening and to get your subsequent pictures, to see that large eel come within basically hours or days of that official opening. Wonderful to see. So, yeah, it's keep up the good work. Thank you. Yeah. All right. So is that you done, Sarah? Could somebody grab that cake and bring a knife out and let's cut it in front of her? Robbie, can I delegate that to you, please? There being no further general business, can I ask Adam to close the meeting with the KARAKIA?
My pleasure, Mr. Chairman. Una hea, una hea, una hea, mai te ruru tapu nui. Te wātea, te mama, te nākau, te tenana, te henanaro, e te ara takatu. Ko rā e rongo, e whakaraira, aki ke ranga. Te tēnā, huie, tai ki e.
Thank you. And just before I close the meeting, once again, thank you, Sarah, and wish you all the best. Look, it has been a long day, but I actually think that we are getting into some of the meat of the situation. I certainly, and I think I can speak on behalf of Robbie, is that we are finding this format extremely valuable because we can go forward with the mandate from this group and likewise with the Hauraki group, which was missing for a few years. The rest of council is seeing benefit in these groups, which is really pleasing. When I looked at the agenda, I thought, oh my God, but there's a lot of financial stuff in there. So for the landowners in particular, can I have some feedback, if you're willing to give it at some stage, on the content of the agenda and that information? I am absolutely looking at bringing the annual financials. How often do we need financials along the way to monitor and the likes? And if you've got any feedback, I'd certainly like to hear it so that we can consider going forward. And I'm certainly seeing the benefit of having the likes of Michelle and Maxine in the room to give objective input from the outside. So thank you very much for your attendance. And I declare the meeting closed and look forward to sharing with Sarah a little bit of cake. Thank you. Thank you very much.